the distance training part of the conference, when everyone is exhausted and we are left with what my students would say are ride or dies. So all of the true believers are here, and I appreciate that for back-to-back panels. This panel is quite unique in that the original chair, Dr. Ellen SCHRECKER, had a family emergency and had to bow out at one of the final minutes through absolutely no fault of her own. And while we witnessed her insight and commentary, we had absolutely on deck David Rabin, who has almost a leap of faith. We made contact late in the planning process. He has a lot of experience in the topics that we're discussing. We wanted to fit him in. We couldn't. And I said, if you can just get to St. Augustine, I promise you we'll find a place for you to fit in. While this was not what I intended, David is a Regents Chair and University Distinguished Teaching Professor at the University of Texas at Austin School of Law. He brings a degree of expertise, legal expertise, to this topic that I think is far and above what we could expect for this particular topic. So, David, I'm going to turn the floor over to you, and thank you so much for filling in on such short notice.
Well, I'm delighted to fill in for Ellen SCHRECKER, an old colleague of mine. We both were active in the AUP for many years. Ellen wrote a few notes that I will read, and then I'll introduce the panelists. Oh, but I wanted to say one thing. I've been involved in the AUP. I'm also involved in a new organization called the Academic Freedom Alliance. There was a lot of talk this morning about where do you go when you have a problem with academic freedom and free speech. Both of these organizations are places to go, and both of them will have literature and information at lunch tomorrow at the various panels. So I think you're going to do it for the AUP, Isaac, and I'll do it for the Academic Freedom Alliance. So I just wanted to mention that. So here's what Ellen wanted me to say, which was first thanking Michael Butler for organizing what I assume is an amazing conference. And I can now say what is an amazing conference. So thank you, Michael, for me, as well as from Ellen. Ellen says this particular panel was the byproduct of a project Valerie Johnson, Jennifer Ruth, and I began a little over a year ago to put together a package of essays and documents that would help faculty members and others within and outside the academic community resist the intensifying right-wing culture war against teaching the truth. The result was a book, The Right to Learn, Resisting the Right-Wing Attack on Academic Freedom, that Beacon Press will publish with a foreword by Irene Mulvey, the president of the AUP, in April 2024. And Ellen sent me a copy of the table of contents of the book that I'm happy to show to people afterwards if you're interested. Every member of this panel, Ellen points out, is a contributor to this volume, along with 15 other academics, activists, lawyers, and others. Finally, Ellen says that she hopes the conference will be as valuable a contribution to the struggle for the freedom to teach. And were I here, I would thank all of you in the audience for participating in this important event and urge those faculty members who are present to return to their campuses energized and ready to take collective action, along with their colleagues, students, administrators, and local activists, to resist the current attack on educators at every level. As our nation's founders realized, a democratic political system requires a well-educated citizenry. It is up to us, students, teachers, and concerned members of the public to preserve the schools and colleges that supply those citizens with the knowledge they need. We need to save the American mind. And now to introduce the panelists, I'll introduce them in the order in which they'll be speaking. Isaac KAMOLA is an associate professor of political science at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He is the author of Free Speech and Coke Money, Manufacturing a Campus Culture War with Ralph Wilson, published in 2021, and Making the World Global, U.S. Universities and the Production of the Global Imaginary, 2019. He is the creator of Faculty First Responders, a program that monitors right-wing attacks on academics and provides resources to help faculty members and administrators respond to manufactured outrage. Valerie C. Johnson is Associate Professor of Political Science and an endowed professor of urban diplomacy at the Grace School of Applied Diplomacy at DePaul University in Chicago, Illinois. She is also the Associate Provost for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. Dr. Johnson's research and teaching explore the intersections of race and class. Her publications include Black Power in the Suburbs, The Myth or Reality of African American Suburban Political Incorporation, and Power in the City. Dr. Johnson is the former National Education Spokesperson for Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr. and the Rainbow Push Coalition, and has served as a consultant for we hope they're educated. They are elected officials and community organizations nationwide. And Katie Rainwater is a visiting assistant teaching professor at Florida International University, where she teaches sociology courses. Her research on guest worker programs in Asia has appeared in Work, Employment, and Society, International Migration Review, and Critical Asian Studies. Her current research project examines the experiences of farmers and workers in the export-driven shrimp aquaculture industries of Thailand and Bangladesh. She is a member of the United Faculty of Florida and Labor Notes Public Higher Education Workers Group. So, Isaac, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. I think a PowerPoint of mine will appear in a second, hopefully. But I just want to thank Michael Butler for organizing, Michael Butler, Nancy McLean, all the folks at the Lehrman Gilder Center, at Yale's Gilder Lehrman Center, for organizing all of this. All the people on top of that, Jasmine Santos and Michelle Zaks are the ones I know by name because they sent a lot of emails, but I know that there's a lot of other people who are involved in the planning. And I'd also like to thank Serena, who is at home with the kids and allows me to be here. So I greatly appreciate that. So in June of 2017, I was working in my office at Trinity College. I got a call on my phone that said we had to evacuate campus. I went across campus to pick up my kids at the child care center, and I brought them home and was wondering what the heck is going on. Why did we have to evacuate campus? Was there a live shooter on campus? What was going on? It turns out that campus reform, which is an outlet it claims to be a media outlet that's funded by the Leadership Institute, which we heard about in the previous panel, is a outlet that specializes in writing outrage pieces against higher education about academics, accusing them of liberal bias. Had written a story about my colleague Johnny Williams. That led me to become, in the 6 years since, become a reluctant expert on right-wing attacks on higher education. And I wrote this book called Free Speech and Coke Money with my friend and an excellent researcher on dark money in higher education, Ralph Wilson. What I want to do today is to talk a little bit about the Coke Donors Network and its broader strategy. The thing is that campus reform is funded by the Leadership Institute. The Leadership Institute is part of what its founder, Morton Blackwell, calls a political technology. We talked, Nancy talked at the beginning about how Coke thinks of ideas and infrastructure as as technology. Morton Blackwell calls the Leadership Institute a part of the political infrastructure. And so I want to look at the Koch donor network and its particular political strategy and why education, right? Why is it so interested in higher education? And I'll try to breeze through this because a lot of these pieces have already been put in play today by Nancy and others who've spoken. But then what I want to do is to give a clear example of what this looks like in Florida. Okay. So as we've heard, the Koch donor network is a bunch of really, really wealthy plutocrats who meet on a regular basis. In our book, we call it the Koch donor network. It's a bunch of organizations like the Charles Koch Foundation stand together as the organization that puts together twice a year. They bring together billionaires to meet at very exotic locations to strategize how they're going to spend their money. If you're there, you have to commit at least $100,000. They meet with Supreme Court justices like Clarence Thomas. They meet with politicians, media personalities, academics, think tank personnel. They bring all these people together with the big donors, and they sit in the room and they talk about what they're going to do. These are some of the donors that are part of this broader network. When in 2017, Richard Cochran and Ron DeSantis attended a Koch donor summit in Colorado Springs, and Speaker Cochran came back saying the gathering was a chance to share the conservative successes we've had in Florida and get ideas for the future. That was 6 years ago. I think that what we are seeing now is what those ideas of the future look like. So I think it's really important that the Koch donor network, the way that they understand political strategy is not random, right? Is that they have, since the 1970s, they realized that their ideas were minoritarian. And we've heard people talk about this so far, is that people don't like their ideas. So in order to get those ideas passed, they have to have a different strategy for creating the kind of world that they imagine, right? And so what happens is that they have developed a different theory of how social change happens. Most activist groups, or most groups that are interested in change of the world, they have an issue: climate change, animal rights, pro-life, pro-choice, and they advocate on behalf of that idea. The Koch donor network has basically decided that you need a different conception of social change, and you need a conception of change that follows an industrial model. They take Hayek's model of industrial production and they apply it to social change. So instead of producing widgets at the end of your production facility, you end up with legislation. Right. And so how do you produce legislation at an industrial scale? You start with the raw materials. Where are those raw materials found? In the universities, right? If you eventually want a Supreme Court justice to rule on something like the major theory doctrine or whatever cockamamie legal theory, you have to have a scholar of law to write those journal articles, to publish that stuff. If you want to create a U.S.-centric anti-Black historical curriculum, you need the historians who are in their academic centers and their civic centers writing those textbooks that they can then go on and become the curriculum, right? So you start with that raw material of ideas. But basically, they realize that academics, as much as we think that we're changing the world when we're doing our research, they know that the academic ideas just kind of float around in the academy often, and they need to be turned into actionable ideas. And that takes place in the think tank. So they talk about it as a pipeline between the academic centers and the think tanks that then, using their language, refine the raw materials into things like model legislation, into white papers, into research, into talking points. All of that then gets handed over to the issue advocacy organizations, which are your organizations like Americans for Prosperity and other groups that really hit the ground. And then at that point, once you've created this apparatus for mass producing legislation, then you approach your legislators and say, hey, look, there's all these people are interested in parental rights. All these people want to ban critical race theory, right? And so you've created this integrated structure. That's how they refer to it. They talk about it as an integrated structure, right? So what does this look like in practice? You have the academic centers, the example of Utah State University, for example, that was a libertarian think tank that shut down as a think tank and opened up as an academic center. Same with the two in Arizona, where they are now granting degrees and majors to students with the state paying. And then those ideas, along with the talent, right? They talk about a student pipeline where they're bringing students from campus into the broader political infrastructure, as well as the legitimacy that the the university provides. If you say, hey, this is an idea that taxation, that cutting taxes on the wealthy is good for everybody, and it comes from a think tank, people are like, wait a minute, that's just ideology, right? But if it comes from a paper by an academic who's at a prestigious institution, at a particular center, has all of these like fancy names after them, then those ideas, which are funded by the same people, right, are seen as legitimate because they come from the university. But those ideas then work their way into that series of networks that we've heard so much about, and then into the organizations like Americans for Prosperity and Freedom Works, which are these big, massive political operations. Americans for Prosperity has as much field capacity as the Democratic Party, as the Republican Party, and it is pushing these radical libertarian ideas. Freedom Works is similar, and Freedom Works actually runs this group called BEST, which is Bettering Education for Students Tomorrow or Today. I forget the acronym. I'm dyslexic, so these acronyms kind of all blur together into this like nonsense puddle that's my head now. But basically what BEST is they bring people together to run for school boards and train them and educate them. And again, this is being run by the Koch-funded field operation. They also have area-specific AstroTurf groups, such as the American Energy Alliances, which is like truck owners who really want to be able to buy gas-guzzling trucks, and the Libra Initiative, which is their Latino outreach operation, and 60 plus is those people over 60 who just want to abolish Social Security, right? And they create these very issue advocacy groups that again create that presence that they manufacture that notion of widespread public support, but in fact is paid for by political operatives, and then that gets turned into legislation. So some of the most horrible legislation that we've seen in the past 20 years, you can see a direct line from there to there to there to there, and then you get Janus, you get Right to Work, you get disinformation about voter fraud that then leads to voter ID laws. You get concealed carry. You get all kinds of the most heinous legislation for the past 20 years works its way through this kind of system. Okay, so how does this work in Florida? I think it's really important that the Florida that we're seeing now didn't happen this year, it didn't happen a few years ago. It's been going on for many, many years. And so what I want to do is situate the current situation within what's called the campus free speech crisis. I'll explain what that means in a second. Then we can look at the CRT moral panic and the new college example, right? So this is the analysis that Ralph and I offered in our book called Coke Money, Free Speech and whatever it was called. But basically what we did is we looked at a few years ago, you might remember this, 2017, 2018, 2019, 5 minutes. There was a bunch of controversial speakers who were coming to campus. Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, Charles Murray, they're being shouted down. And people were saying, oh my God, campuses they hate free speech. Well, if you look at that story and you actually follow the money behind it with this type of understanding, what you see is that the provocateurs who are coming to campus, Milo Yiannopoulos' entire career was bought and paid for by the same donor network. The student groups who brought him to campus were funded by the same donor network. The media machinery that was so outraged that the students were protesting, it was funded by the same network. And then on top of that, you had groups that were suing schools to allow people like Milo Yiannopoulos, I'll try not to swear here, like people like Milo Yiannopoulos on campus. And then you have groups that were passing legislation to change the speech laws on campus so that people could not protest people like Milo Yiannopoulos, and campuses had to allow professional provocateurs on campus, right? That wasn't just a spontaneous uprising of these people who showed up on campus and it was this part of this manufactured political process. That's what we demonstrate in that book. So in Florida, what this looks like as the Charles Koch funded think tank, the James Madison Institute, as far back as 2013, was publishing a bunch of different pieces talking about the free speech crisis in Florida higher education. If you look at that 2017 report, actually, and you go to the footnotes, I'm an academic, so I love reading the footnotes. It's all footnotes from Cato, Heritage, Fire, ALEC. ACTA. It's just like all of the who's who. So basically, they've created this network of think tanks and academics that are all talking to each other that appear to be a legitimate conversation. And then they turn it into another piece of propaganda that the think tank is putting out and saying, hey, there's a crisis of free speech in Florida schools, right? Then in 2017, the Nazi Richard Spencer came to University of Florida and was protested. That then allowed the Florida legislature to pass the Campus Free Expression Act in 2018, which was one of the model bills that was being pushed by Fire, Alec, and Goldwater. There was 3 competing model bills that then pushed that campus free speech that basically said you couldn't protest Nazis that come to your campus, right? In a few years later, in 2021, that exact piece of legislation, the Campus Free Expression Act, was edited, was modified, was amended into House Bill 233. What House Bill 233 does is it allows students to videotape their professors that they can then use in litigation to claim that they've been shielded from ideas, right? And then it mandates a survey to then manufacture the evidence that there's a crisis of viewpoint diversity in Florida schools, when the legislatures who passed that legislation could not point to a single example of crisis of viewpoint diversity in Florida schools. And they basically said the survey mandated in House Bill 233 will then provide the evidence that this is indeed a problem, right? The reason they were able to pass that legislation without any evidence that there was a problem was because of the kind of work the James Madison Institute had done years before. Right. So now, I'm going the wrong direction. Boop, 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 boop. Okay. So now you get to, we all know who Chris Rufo is at this point at the Manhattan Institute. I think it's really important to know this guy would be nobody. He would be completely insignificant, except his entire career has been made possible by a series of think tanks that are funded by the same people I talked about at the beginning of the show. He shows up on Tucker Carlson. Trump sees that burping that he did on Fox News and creates an executive order, right? That executive order banning trainings, right? Then the guy in the White House, his budget officer, Russ Voigt, takes that executive order, goes to the Conservative Partnership Institute, funded by people that is housed with people from Heritage and funded by Uline, Bradley, and a bunch of other usual suspects, takes that executive order, turns it, and I'm going the wrong way again, turns it into model legislation that becomes House Bill 7, right? So the Stop Woke Act is a bill that was written, that was the product of a hack from the Manhattan Institute on Fox News that becomes an executive order that then becomes part of a right-wing grassroots operation and then becomes a bill, and then who's right there, Chris Rufo, when DeSantis signs this. And then here's the people, 3 of the people who then become the board. And you can see, there are numerous connections with the same political infrastructure. So, sorry, I'm out of time.
Isaac has my heart beating fast. When you mentioned Milo, I harken back to the days that a Breitbart hit piece was written on me, and I ended up on the professor watch list. You think that the right really value free speech? Well, you say something they don't like, and you'll see. Okay. Okay. So, what can I say? I'm demoralized, as the rest of you all are. And actually, having read Katie's piece in our book and Isaac's piece in our book, I knew what they were going to say. So I decided to go off in left field a little bit. And left field is actually where I live. So it's a very comfortable place for me. But, as I was putting this together, I was thinking of an excellent title. First, I thought about the great myth of democracy, then the state legislative gag orders, the cost of democracy in higher education, white identity politics, and finally, I settled on the American war between white people. Okay, because I wanted to share with someone other than my close friends, how I'm kind of conceptualizing this. And shameless plug against the book. It's the date on it is April 9th, 2024. That's the book that Isaac and Katie both have a piece on. Ellen and Jennifer Ruth are my co-editors. Let me start with a quote. And this is from Frederick Douglass. David Blight is certainly familiar with Frederick Douglass. No. But I love that book, by the way. America is false to the past, false to the present, and solemnly binds herself to be false to the future. Everything that we're talking about today has its roots in the past. As I mentioned, as I asked a question of our previous panelists, none of this is new. I mean, this has long and deep roots flowing through our history. And because we have not unshackled ourselves, if you will, from the past, we continually repeat it. It's almost like the Twilight Zone. You keep going back and forth in and out of the same door. Okay. This is a quote that I used in the book. The quest to hide the ugly truth of American history is not new. From the founding down through to the present, there has been tension between those who would like to shroud the truth about, what we can learn. And those who understand that an accurate accounting of history is the necessary backdrop to reconciling the past and finally realizing the country that we say that we already are, right? Obviously, we characterize ourselves in different ways as a nation, but the unfortunate truth is that we have never been that. It's aspirational. All of those wonderful words about who we are is actually a goal. It's like a mission statement, if you will. As Associate Provost of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I have to tell my colleagues often that the mission statement is actually a goal. It's not a fait accompli, right? We're always working toward it. 3 arguments. Again, America has always been deeply affected by the tensions in white values and vision of America. Education gag orders are merely the latest iteration. And although BIPOC people have generally been kind of clear about, historical characterizations of America, I feel very strongly that until white people, and I'm not trying to essentialize whiteness, actually, that's one of my disclaimers, but until white people, the majority of people in the US, reach some sort of consensus about the country that we say we want to be, we're going to be continuously divided, and it's going to get to a point where it's ungovernable. Right? It's reaching a real scary crescendo. It's always been scary, but I guess because we're alive in this moment, it's scary to us. It's certainly been scary to other people in the past. Needless to say, the past is manufactured and contested, just like Isaac was showing you how it is manufactured and packaged. Now, it's always been manufactured and, packaged. It's always been contested. It's always been a way of trying to reinforce patriotism or legitimize a particular heritage. And we know who have been left out of the American story. And certainly this convenient forgetting, if you will, who we were or have been, certainly impacts our views about racial disparities or disparities alongside minoritized groups. And, it certainly affects any tendency we might have to ameliorate those conditions, right? What we know about the past is obviously, given legitimacy through what sort of institution? Certainly education. And of course, they're enshrined in public monuments. Everything we say see every commercial. I always get, friends of mine, they're like, damn, Val, you're even critiquing the commercials. But I mean, everything is a part of how we learn about society. And so it's enshrined in particularly education, as Paulo Freire would say, education is a political act. It is either used to maintain the status quo or change it or alter it, right? And so education is like the perfect place. And that's why I think Germany, obviously there is a resurgence of the right in Germany, but Germany, at least they have kind of come to some sort of, here and not further type of setup. Of course, we know the Federal Republic of Germany guarantees freedom of speech, expression, opinion, just like we purportedly do. However, the German Penal Code prohibits publicly denying the Holocaust and disseminating Nazi propaganda, both offline and online. I was struck, I used to teach this study abroad course in Berlin on history, memory, and the law. And in 2017, I was struck by how 2 students from China were arrested in front of the Bundestag for doing the Heil Hitler sign. And then we come back to America, and guess what's going on? Charlottesville, and I'm like, okay, Germany, they arrested them. Right? There was no legitimizing that, right? But here in America, we venerate the good guys and the bad guys. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? I love this image right here. It's the Dover Little activity books. Whatever your political predisposition is, there's a little activity book for you. And it has 27 stickers. Well, the Confederate one has 27 stickers. The other one has 24 stickers. I'm being facetious. But I mean, it's like we venerate, it's still, we're just kind of toying with it. Are we really going to be who we say we are? And every iteration of this, the answer is no. You would have thought we would have gotten it right during the civil rights movement, right? Which most people put at 1955 to 1968. Here we are, how many years later? It's the same old story, right? And so conceptually for me, and this is, again, I'm sharing my ideas with you all, how I think of this. Conceptually, again, it's sort of like this, it's just a latest iteration of the war, American war between white people. And for me, it's like conceptually kind of like the Cold War. The Cold War was a state of conflict between nations that didn't involve any sort of military action, but it was pursued through economic, political actions, propaganda, right, and acts of espionage, right? When you look at the American war between white people, same thing. It's a state of conflict between white Americans that does not involve any direct military action, right? But it's pursued primarily through economic, political actions, propaganda, disinformation, misinformation, and acts of domestic terrorism, like we saw down the street in Jacksonville a couple of weeks ago, right? This is dangerous. The American war between white people, certainly, as has been said earlier, it's like, this is a real war between the values of America. Again, who are we going to be once and for all, right? And we fought it over and over again. We go from the past to the future, same thing. It's like, all this turmoil. It's constant, right? Parties to the conflict. We have, of course, the conservative strain. And here we go again. And some of their select characteristics of this conservative strain is, of course, racist, opposed to body autonomy, a woman's right to choose. They're supportive of education gag orders, a revisionist history, homophobic, nationalists, anti-immigration, election deniers, QAnon believers, supporters of voter suppression. And we always couch this in terms like, democracy, but does any of this look democratic? I mean, one thing I've been struck with as I've listened to some of the panelists, it's like this sort of fear, the teachers are afraid, the professors are afraid, the journalists, everybody's afraid, right? And you have to ask yourself, how are we still talking about or characterizing this as democracy? It's just baffling. One of my students wrote that in a paper. She's like, how are we, it's just fascinating how we still kind of couch this in terms of democracy when it is in fact the antithesis of democracy, right? When you look at the right's effectiveness, it's bolstered by the epistemology of ignorance, right? What is epistemology of ignorance? Charles Mills, in his book, The Racial Contract, talks about it as a system of knowledge attainment that impedes the ability to accurately understand social reality and its attendant racial and social inequities and implications. And that is, it's again, whether you want to call it the bubble or an epistemology of ignorance, it's like we're kind of like churning out the stuff that just keeps our folk just, ignorant and not really being able to really understand the truth about who we are, okay? And needless to say, this has tremendous effect on not only education, but the ability of Americans to make informed decisions about public policy or about the officials they elect. I am literally shocked and dismayed when I look at the cast of characters in our Congress. It is, at least before, they were always rascals, so to speak, but, at least they had an air of, morality or something. It was easier to believe, that they were really standing up for democracy. But now all pretense has just been removed. This is not about democracy. We're not even playing that anymore. This is strictly about raw, brute power, white supremacy, right? And control. Who are the liberal strain throughout the period? Certainly we've had a white liberal strain who have fought the good fight, right? Alongside BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Select characteristics, sort of colorblind policies and practices. Eduardo Bonilla Silva will refer to that as racism light. It's not quite racism, but are we free yet? What does liberation look like? Not quite. Supportive of body autonomy, tolerant of assimilated identities. And I say that in all earnestness, the left is tolerant as long as it's kind of assimilated, pro-immigration, voter reform. Impediments to the left's effectiveness is, this clicker is in fact intuitive, but we all been having problems with it, right? White racial ambivalence is obvious. White racial ambivalence is obviously one hindrance to the left. It's like this sort of mixed feelings or contradictory values about racial equity and social justice. Also, white racial dissonance, as I like to call it. That dissonance. We've been so dipped and indoctrinated into about, who we are, America, equality, and all of that, it's kind of hard to believe when it shows up and it's so different. You're like, but we're democratic. I mean, it doesn't look like it, but, so it's this sort of white racial and dissonance. So implications, who wins, who loses. I don't have to say that. She's telling me I got 10 more minutes. No, I'm joking. I got to wrap up, but disclaimers. Again, this is not about, I'm not trying to essentialize whiteness or BIPOC people, but I mean, can we just decide once and for all who we want to be and literally go for broke on that? Because otherwise, as Frederick Douglass said, false to the past, false to the present, solemnly bound to be false to the present. So I'm going to leave it like that. Maybe I could tease out the rest in the question and answer period.
Okay, so I'm going to be speaking from the perspective of organizing in my faculty union. So I'm represented by the United Faculty of Florida, which represents full-time faculty members on most Florida's university campuses and community colleges. In my campus, our faculty union is kind of a silo of organized labor. We have about 1,400 people in our bargaining unit, but adjunct faculty members are not unionized. Neither are graduate students, neither are most staff. So, this panel is about following the money and fighting back. And so I wanted to kind of start off by saying that when, as a union, we're kind of talking about the rights attacks and what's going on, I think we need to be talking about money. So as social movements, unions have an important role to play in framing, right? And giving people an idea about what's the problem and what's the solution. And I think as a union, we're at our weakest when we frame the attacks as DeSantis is attacking this education system that's not broken, or, when we appeal to the world-class nature of Florida's universities. I mean, I think instead we need to frame the attacks as threatening to further undermine a public education system that has long been degraded by underfunding and has long been falling short of what the people of Florida deserve. And so we need to connect DeSantis's attacks with the decade-long privatization project that was carried out, by former governors Jeb Bush and Scott, that has sought to divest funding from our public schools and to eliminate educators' unions and the tenured educators that stand to oppose this agenda. So when we're responding to any, new piece of legislation or policy, be they curriculum bans, post-tenure review, the state-funded right-wing think tanks on our campus, I think it's important that we drive home that all these policies have the intent to empower an elite that's interested in maintaining low levels of democratic participation because it's benefiting from our currently high levels of inequality, from the fact that Florida doesn't have state income tax, from the fact that we're inadequately funding our public institutions. Okay, so messaging is important, but organizing our members to resist and to demand the public education that Floridians deserve is at the heart of what the union should be doing. And so I'm delighted to be speaking with you, today as the United Auto Workers under their new reform leadership are on strike. And it is so exciting to be part of the labor movement in this time when unions are relearning the importance of organizing their members around transformative demands. For too long, the labor movement has been too docile. Union leadership has looked past their members and instead has sought to collaborate with management, or to influence primarily in this legislative realm. But this is starting to change, and we're seeing, a wave of labor militancy, and unions are starting to relearn the lesson that their power comes from their members' ability to act as a collective and to disrupt the status quo. And so I've been so inspired by, this recent wave of union organizing, including what we saw recently at Rutgers, right? The UC Berkeley strikes last year, and of course, Chicago Teachers Union back in 2012, and United Teachers of Los Angeles. So here in Florida, I think, United Faculty of Florida and the Florida Education Association has been too focused on legislative advocacy and fighting in the courts. This has a place, but it can't come at the expense of organizing our campuses, which is, I think, what unions should primarily be doing. And I think this is, unions' most important focus. So what does this look like? So I'll speak a little bit about some of the organizing we've been doing on our campus, as well as, ideas I have for organizing. And I will say at the beginning, this hasn't been tremendously successful, right? I'm still standing here before you today, and we're still facing all these threats. And maybe in the Q&A, I can reflect on some of the reasons why. So I think, the first thing I want to talk about is we started organizing on campus around HB7. And so when it came time to go back to campus last fall, our statewide union sent around legal guidance, right? And they recommended faculty should choose their own risk level. So they said, okay, if you want to take a high risk approach, just keep teaching. As you're teaching, the union will have your back. But if you're low risk, then don't cover any of these topics at all in your classroom, and take down any posters. When Adriana was speaking about her colleagues taking down the posters, I recalled that was in the union's legal guidance to us. If we were low risk, we should take down posters that express any kind of commitment to racial or gender inequality. So, some of us read this and felt that it was absolutely the wrong approach. And so instead, in our union, the kind of constitution, it says academic freedom is one of our commitments. And many of us felt that our students couldn't wait on this content about race and gender inequality. It was too important. And so what we did is we circulated a petition, and we asked people to do two things. The first was to pledge to uphold academic freedom in their classrooms. And the second one was to be ready to come out and protest in case any one of us got disciplined. We also had a teach-in. So the kind of second thing the second large organizing effort was in partnership with a lot of student groups. This was around HB 999, right, which would have banned certain majors, introduced more curriculum bans. It would have completely gutted DEI. And so what we did for this protest, we had the idea of we need to shut down campus. Florida International University, where I work, it's a majority minority institution. Our students are, many of them are gender non-normative. No one was on board with this legislation. And so we had, students had the idea that we should engage in structured based organizing. The campus is already organized into classes. And so we need to have a classroom organizer from every class who can organize their fellow students to kind of walk out. So that was the idea. There was many student organizers that worked on this. I was working on it from the perspective of a faculty member reaching out to other faculty about it. We had student organizers reaching out to students. We didn't, end up shutting down campus. We did have the largest protest in our campus's history. About 400 to 600 people came out, and we had speeches, and then we wrote Post-it notes, which we posted on the building of the administration building, asking the administration to stand with faculty and students and protect academic freedom and DEI on campus. Okay, so moving forward, I think there's a couple other things that are really important for the faculty union to focus on. School board has been mentioned before, and I think, you know, especially in a university like my university, in which the majority of our students actually are commuter students, and many of them are coming from the local public schools, I think it makes sense for us as the faculty union to be invested in school board elections, to begin developing candidates that can run, that can use their kind of candidacy to speak to the importance of like fully funded public education, high quality for all students. And then I think the second thing that we're focusing on is a contract campaign. And so we are, you know, renegotiating the contract. And I think how bargaining has typically happened on my campus is it's been a small group of faculty go bargain with the administration. And at the end, we all sign a tentative agreement. And most faculty are not involved of or aware of what's going on. Educators' unions have shown, I think, a different way of having contract campaigns, right? So within K through 12 education, educators' unions are increasingly adopting this approach called bargaining for the common good. And what they do is very early on, they invite community stakeholders, parents, students in to talk to them about, you know, what do we need to change about our schools, right? Because they realize this, that the conditions of our teaching, right, are the conditions of our students' learning. And then the students will be involved, in determining the demands, and also in supporting the educators at the bargaining table, so they gain more leverage, because they know that, you know, when educators are negotiating, when they're bargaining, they are not just asking for things that are going to benefit them, but are asking for things that are going to benefit the whole community, and they have the support of the whole community. And so I think in our contract campaign that's coming up, what we really need to do is we need to think about how can we fight back to against what's happening at the level of the state legislature at the bargaining table. So for instance, how can we bring in more demands for academic freedom, and not even just for members of our bargaining unit, right? But also for the adjunct faculty that are not in our unit, right? What kinds of job security measures should we be thinking about for them at this moment? Or on our campus, the student government, some of the student government members are advocating for more gender neutral bathrooms, right? And these are also the kinds of demands that we can be bringing to the bargaining table to push back. Okay, I'll end there. Thanks.
I'll let you go around and recognize people. You've been doing so well.
Thanks, Dacia. Professor Johnson, I'd like to ask you a question by even responding to the other two, and I'll do it quickly. It seems to me you're flanked by two people that do believe democracy is possible.
Oh, I believe it's possible too.
Okay, but I do want to suggest that this is just for the cause of discussion. That same Frederick Douglass, who said that quote, and that's an amazing quote, of course, was saying very different things after emancipation. By the late 1860s, he thought the United States had reinvented itself and even ought to export the 14th Amendment. So history is not always a single line. And this crazy thing, democracy, obviously is a roller coaster at best. But I do think it's a struggle to remember that in times like this. It's just the same old thing all over again. Same old thing. You're absolutely right. This is nothing new. I mean, the history wars, the education wars are a century and a half old, at least. But there's a danger in falling into this kind of sense of history as just the same damn thing over and over. Otherwise, that kind of union organizing wouldn't even happen. Okay.
And I can imagine that Frederick Douglass did feel different when, after emancipation. I think a lot of people felt different after George Floyd. There are instances where people feel different, but it seems like we always kind of revert back to the same thing, sort of like. We might not want to call it the same thing. It's a much more sophisticated version. And that makes it actually more dangerous as we pick up steam, because it becomes very difficult to fight it. Like we were talking about, it's like, how do you fight somebody who says that they're for democracy and liberty when it's packaged differently? So I don't think it's the exact same thing, but it's like strumming an old song, if you will. So it's not the same thing. It's actually picking up some speed. It's becoming much more difficult to fight. And that's why I think it's absolutely more dangerous. Now, yeah. And the organizing that is occurring, I think, is just spectacular. That's why Jennifer Ruth, myself, and Emily Ho, we had the Faculty Senate Resolution Campaign, hoping to really get faculty engaged in understanding their power. But again, it's like, I could imagine if Frederick Douglass made it to the 1950s or either 2016, he might have been disappointed again, if you will. Yeah, he definitely, yeah.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question for Isaac, and I would like to also comment on what you just mentioned, which I completely agree. And the sense, I don't think the history repeats itself. The problem is that we cannot solve the problems. We cannot figure out how to get something that help us to move on about certain things. So it's not like history repeats itself. We are unable to find solutions. But Isaac, I want to ask you about something, because this is personal to me. And it's about, you put the thing about fire, it's about this organization, blah, blah. I'm a personal victim of that, because I'm a leftist, as you can be. And then people that didn't know me, didn't know who I am, or because I don't have social media, and this seems the only way. We are intellectuals now that we don't dare to argue and confront somebody, or, start to say, stop talking, or I'm implying cowards who didn't dare to sue, by the way. Start to gossip and say, oh, she's a conservative, don't talk to her. Oh my God. That is wrong, because I think that is one of the problems that is making very difficult to get things done. Because and by the way, I made a mistake. I said I turned down 3 times and only accepted, and it was under my terms. Because all these labels and this distraction, all these labels and distractions are getting in the way to see the big objective. I want to destroy that stupid law. It was fundamental because I cannot teach anymore if it's in place. So I should say no or fire, money, because of that. And I think when we are having these discussions, it's very important to understand that people like me, have no access to resources. I don't care what they funded. If they want to fight the law in my terms, I will vote for them. So this is, as I said, is bothering me very much, because it's extended among the left. This kind of purism that, you need to be pure and not to take this or that. and gets in the way to solve issues and address the problem. So I would like if you can comment on that.
No, that's a great question, and one that we hear quite a lot, Ralph and I, the question of FIRE. And I think that for those who don't know, the FIRE is the Foundation for Individual Rights in Expression, formerly the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And they are a legal group that's very successful at suing universities. I think if you objectively look at their track record, they occasionally do pick up good cases like House Bill 7. I do not think that they're universally condemnable. That's not our argument. But if you look at their track record, the number of faculty that they defend who have been harassed by right-wingers is way smaller than the number of student groups that are funded by the same network that they receive money from, that they create a legal ecosystem in which student groups funded by the Koch brothers pull stunts on campus that then lead to litigation that they oversee. So basically, I think that for us, what was so important about what was happening with that model legislation in 2017 is there's 3 different organizations that all received different amounts of funding and played a different kind of function. So FIRE is a fairly reputable organization, receives a ton of money from the Koch brothers, and has a very free speech focus, right, in their litigation strategy. They're pushing the claim that you should have free speech on college campus and trying in a way that circumvents certain understandings of academic freedom, right? Or they're free speech absolutists, which I think that reasonable people can hold that argument. And whatever. I'm not going to have a debate about free speech absolutism. I completely agree that's a position that people can have. ALEC and Goldwater had much more draconian bills, and they were all being introduced at the same time. And so it created the semblance of a debate, right? So instead of saying, should schools be forced to penalize students for protesting speakers? Instead of asking that question, they were saying, well, which of these bills is the least draconian? We'll go with that way. So, and this is the same thing that the Koch brothers do, and that donor network does, for example, with student groups on campus, right? They fund the kind of like old guard, Young Americans for Freedom, the kind of like Buckleyite, genteel, or they not so genteel now, but they have this aura of being like the true serious conservatives. And then they also fund Turning Points USA, right? And everything in between, Students for Liberty, et cetera. So they basically are creating a situation in which you now have a debate about, oh, is Turning Points going too far in comparison to this other group, right? And so basically they fund the entire field in order to create an ecosystem. And there's a lot of diversity within that ecosystem, right? And it's not a top down, like we're going to fund this group because they say this particular thing, right? They say we're going to fund an entire ecosystem. And some of those groups that they fund are groups that, they're also in favor of ending mass incarceration, right? Because they're libertarians who want the state to be involved. They want private corporations running our prisons, but they want to, so in that way, I think it's important that they see this as a strategic terrain. And I think it's important for us to see it as a strategic terrain. If FIRE can be useful, then we should use FIRE, right? We shouldn't expect, however, for FIRE to always be useful, because empirically, I think that that's not true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
Can you use the microphone, please? I'm listening.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to other questions then.
Is it on? Yes. Hi, thank you. I'm Johanna Foland. I spent about 10 years as an academic historian, and now this year I've just moved into K through 12, and I teach at a public high school in Miami. So, which has been quite a trip, the transition. But so I have a couple of questions, if I may. First of all, for Katie, I would really like to hear your thoughts about shared spaces and networks between K through 12 educator unions and higher ed faculty unions. And then also I have a question for Isaac, which is about people or groups like like Vermilion Education, for example, which are, if I'm remembering the story right, our friend Bridget Ziegler in Sarasota tried to sort of slip a consulting contract to. And I think Vermilion Education is basically just one Hillsdale guy, you know, in his basement or something. So I'm wondering if that is where that fits into your sort of org chart, and if it's like a new stage, these sort of private enterprise splinter groups who are after the same goals. Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Thanks so much for your question. Yeah, you know, I don't think that teachers and you know, instructors in higher ed are talking to one another enough. You know, in our union, so the educators unions, the K through 12 unions, and the higher ed union, we're all, you know, part of the Florida Educators Association. And so our delegate assembly is coming up. And so that's one space where conversations are going to happen, but they're not happening enough at like the level of the local between, for instance, like United Teachers of Dade and United Faculty of Florida, FIU, even though we're both based in Miami and even though we're facing similar issues. So I think one thing that we're actually doing on my campus is I'm involved with some students that are interested in we're thinking with pre-service educators about how do we prepare to go into K through 12 education given the conditions in K through 12 education right now. So we have a reading group on our campus where we're reading about teachers unions and some of the way teachers unions are responding to these attacks. And, you know, these students will eventually graduate and go into teaching and hopefully go on to become union activists that are going to make their unions stronger. But I think certainly there needs to be a lot more dialogue. And I think especially around issues such as school board elections, there's a lot of room to kind of collaborate.
That's a great question. I can't speak to Vermilion per se. I don't know that group, but I think that for me, it's helpful to think about you have ideas that are not sustainable within the academic ecosystem, right? Because what we do in higher education is we vet out bad ideas, and the notion that there's a free market where people who are free can engage in ways that are mutual. That's something that has been widely discredited. Even neoclassical economists don't believe the anarcho-capitalist perspective of these libertarians. So in order to make those ideas survive, you have to create a welfare state that supports those kinds of ideas, right? And so what happens is that there's just the incredible amount of money that's sloshing around in this ecosystem then creates all kinds of opportunities in which there's a lot of incentives to be part of this. So for example, if I was a fellow at the Institute for Humane Studies, one of the George Mason academic centers, massively funded by Charles Koch, I mean, tens if not hundreds of millions of dollars. If I was affiliated with that, I can write 200-300 word essays and receive $50,000 in funding, right? And then, but then there's also all of these, like, there's all of these individuals that then make careers being personalities and personas and having groups and having, I mean, you think about Ben Shapiro, who then creates a media empire because he's in connection with these donors and they like what he says and they bankroll him, right, in order to create a for-profit business that if you take out the dark money behind it is not actually very as for-profit as it claims to be, right? So there's all of these kinds of ways in which people are making a lot of money by being part of and incorporated in this. You have random people who start a group, Moms for Liberty, and now they are jet-setting around the world or around the US being like a very important celebrities, right? And that there's a lot of incentive. And so it's not surprising that there's people who are filling all kinds of entrepreneurial roles within this right-wing welfare state, grift state, whatever that's available because there's just this massive amounts of money sloshing around.
So I think we have some other questions from the audience.
Hi, my name is Alan Marcel. I'm a teacher here at Flagler College, but prior to that, I spent 25 years in Hollywood as a producer and writer of television stuff. WGA, we just ended our strike.
Kicked ass too. That was awesome.
But I have a broader question about the kind of insidious growing anti-intellectualism in this country that I think educators become victims of. And starting with how teachers are so disrespected because they pay them nothing and they put the lives of their children in their hands and don't value what they do. The college thing is a little bit different because I used to think the egos in Hollywood were huge, but then I got in the academic world. I said they're minor league. But how do you, because there's been a couple of recent articles in the New York Times that also are about the disillusionment of the college student. As it was being talked about before, everything's transactional these days. Oh, I put in 4 years, I pay a hell of a lot of money, I get a degree, and I step into a 6-figure job, right? That's how it goes. Instead of exploration of ideas and, you know, try everything. College is where you should be experimenting and, you know, learning stuff, not a skill. But so I think that really has to be addressed, the student activity, because I can probably say I'm a proud boomer. When I was in college, when we put 400,000 people on the mall in Washington, D.C., we ended a war. 4 million hits on Facebook does nothing today. You know, it just gets spun around in the same kind of echo chamber. So I think student activism is very important. And I think that will start with faculty being physically active, not little meetings here and there, stand out there in front of a building, hold the sign, walk up and down the street. I mean, we had a big issue here a couple of years ago, getting rid of a Confederate monument right across the street here. But actually people came out. Of course, it was easy because it was right across the street from the college, so you could just step out at lunchtime. And but so anyway, I want to know your thoughts about the anti-intellectualism that creates this elite thing that gets condemned all the time. You're elitists. Even a guy who's gone to 2 Ivy League schools and is governor of the state, but you know, you're all elitist and he's a baseball player. So you know,
running out of time, I think we can let the answers now come forth. Would anyone like to start?
Okay, I guess I can start. Yeah, so I think the kind of anti-intellectual problem is something I think about a lot. You know, I think there's like a couple different structural issues at play here. One is that, you know, so many of my students are working full time and then commuting very far to campus. And so, you know, I do think that this is creating certain kind of like limitations on what we can do in the classroom, kind of what they have the capacity to do outside of the classroom in terms of getting the readings done, et cetera. But I think, you know, the other kind of issue is I think the Florida state legislature is very much kind of trying to streamline education, make it about kind of going through, getting the credential, getting out, right? They have this like new tool where you're supposed to like go on a website and like figure out like, you know, what can you major in to like maximize your earnings after graduation. So, you know, it's worrying. And I think that as an educators union, it's something we really need to be talking about more, right? Like, how do we fight for like the quality of student education? How do we enable our students to have the kind of, you know, experience that they're really going to come into the classroom and have the capacity to focus and learn and grow from challenging content. So I think, and then the second part of the question is about student movements. You know, we're seeing, we have student movements on our campus. I would have to say like the most active or among the most active student movements on our campus is the YDSA, right? We've seen this growth in the socialist movement, and student socialists are organizing across Florida campuses along with other students as well. So I think in our campus, we had one protest that was kind of jointly organized by the YDSA along with the Pride Student Union and some others. And I would say that kind of the activist student layer is still probably a minority among students, but there are kind of people actively organizing and growing resistance.
So I see we have 2 minutes left. If you last two would like to briefly say something and then.
Well, I was going to say that I think it is a part of that epistemology of ignorance that Charles Mills speaks about in his book, The Racial Contract. And I think one of my bottom lines was that I think that faculty educators in general have to educate not just in the classroom, but outside of the classroom. I think it is very important to begin dialogue with people who think quite differently than you do. And I'm talking about civil dialogue outside. I mean, we're just tremendously blessed by the technology, Zoom technology. I know I'm a part of several Zoom discussions and that really do bring together people who really want to understand the other point of view and try to work from a point of common ground rather than, just sort of this divisive bickering.
Last word, Isaac.
Sure, thanks. Yeah. I think it's really important to understand the present moment as a really radical counter-revolution to a revolution, right? And that higher education in the US for its first 300 years of history has been incredibly elitist, white, exclusionary, misogynistic, and racist. And in the post-war period, through massive democratic action and protest and expansion of the economy, but also the demand that all people have access, we now have the university, right, that we think of as this great institution that is slowly withering away. That great institution is a historical, epiphenomenal period of time, right? And it was possible because of massive democratic opposition that allowed new people to come to campus. And when you had more Black students, you had more queer students, you had women on campus, and they're looking around and saying, this campus doesn't look like my experience. I demand that the institution looks like my experience. And then you get this fundamental transformation of the university. And what we're seeing now is this is that demand to say, no, we don't like this. We want that elitist, racist, misogynist university that we used to have. We want that back, right? The problem that Chris Newfield points out in his book is that this model is incredibly popular. People love the public university and they love what it's done for them, and it built the American middle class, right? And so in order to then defund and to cut the taxes and to create that elitist institutional space again, you have to delegitimize the university so you can then defund it, right? And that's what we've been seeing since the 80s. In Nancy's book, the idea that students pay for their own education through debt was a political strategy that was created by the Cato Institute and others in order to say that, look at all these students who are going out and protesting, right? How can we make sure that they never protest again while we make them pay for their education? So when we say the university that students don't have time, it's not because students are different now. It's because the structural institutions have been changed by people who have a very, very concerted agenda to transform those institutions. And now we're wrong if we just say students don't protest anymore, right?
So on that note, this session will close. Please join me in thanking the panelists. I see on the program we resume at 4:15. Yes. Okay.
Nice job. Keep that. Sorry.